The briefing room fell silent when the tattoo appeared on the overhead projector. Not because it was obscene or inappropriate, but because three men in that room recognized it, and they weren't supposed to. The image showed an intricate design photograph during a routine medical examination at Naval Special Warfare Command. A black sun with 7 rays, each ending in a different symbol. Beneath it, coordinates that led nowhere on any official map. The SEAL team leader, Commander Hayes, felt his throat tighten. He'd seen that exact design once before, burned into his memory during a mission in the Hindu Kush that officially never happened. The patient was listed as a consulting contractor, cleared for low-level tactical advisory work with DEVGRU. Age 63. Name, Elias Cormac. The medical officer had flagged it as a potential security concern, foreign military insignia of unknown origin. But Hayes knew it wasn't foreign. It was older than that. Older than most of the men in this room. "Sir, do we have a problem?" The question came from Lieutenant Voss, youngest on the team, eager and sharp. Hayes didn't answer immediately. He was remembering the cold of that Afghan mountain, the way his radio had died at 11,000 feet, and the voice that had come through the static anyway. A voice that had guided his team through a minefield without a single map reference that made sense. They'd called him Prophet on the comms, but the legend went deeper. Scouts who operated in the black. Observers who weren't supposed to exist. "Get him in here," Hayes finally said, his voice tight. "Now." The young intelligence analyst blinked. "Sir, he's just a contractor, low-grade advisor. We don't even have him on the active." "Get him in here." 30 minutes later, an old man walked into the briefing room. He moved like water, smooth, deliberate, no wasted motion. His hair was silver white, pulled back tight. His face was weathered leather, deeply lined around the eyes. He wore civilian clothes, faded jeans, a canvas jacket, boots that had seen serious miles. But his eyes were what made every operator in that room sit a little straighter. They were pale gray, almost colorless, and they absorbed everything without seeming to look at anything. Cormac didn't salute, didn't speak. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, waiting. Hayes stood. "That tattoo on your ribs, where did you get it?" The old man's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those gray eyes, something that might have been amusement or warning. "Which answer do you want, Commander? The one that's in my file, or the one that'll get this room cleared?" That's when Hayes knew, and that's when the real story began. The room didn't clear immediately. Hayes wasn't ready to show his hand, not yet. Not in front of the younger operators who didn't know the stories that predated their own service. Instead, he dismissed everyone except his senior chief, a barrel-chested operator named Kowalski who'd been running missions since before drones made everyone lazy. Kowalski had been in the mountains too, that night when the impossible happened. Cormac remained standing, patient as stone. He didn't fidget, didn't look around. Just existed in the space with the quiet authority of someone who'd learned long ago that stillness was its own language. "You two can stay," Hayes said to the walls, knowing the intelligence weenies were listening anyway. Then to Cormac, "Sit." The old man took a chair. Not the one Hayes indicated, but another, positioned so his back wasn't to the door and he could see both exits without turning his head. Professional habit, the kind that never dies. Hayes slid a folder across the table. "Your file says you were Army, served in the 80s and 90s, honorable discharge in 98, standard scout reconnaissance, nothing special." "That's what it says." Cormac's voice was quiet, textured like gravel wrapped in silk. "It's horseshit. Most files are." Kowalski leaned back, arms crossed. "We ran your name through channels that aren't supposed to exist anymore. You came up empty, not redacted, empty, like someone went through and pulled you out by the roots. Maybe I was never planted that deep to begin with." Hayes felt his jaw tight. "Hindu Kush, October 2009. My team was compromised. Radio failure. Surrounded. We had a KIA and 2 wounded and no way to call for extract. Then someone came through on a frequency we weren't using, walked us out through terrain that wasn't on any map we had. Voice called himself Prophet. For the first time, something changed in Cormac's face. Not much, just a small tightening around the eyes. Recognition or memory, maybe both. That's a long time ago, Commander. That voice saved 8 lives. I've been trying to find out who it belonged to for 16 years. And now you walk into my building wearing a tattoo that matches a symbol I saw painted on a rock at the rally point where that voice told us to go. Silence settled over the room like snowfall. Cormac looked at Hayes for a long moment, weighing something internal, some calculation that had nothing to do with rank or protocol. "You want the story," Cormac finally said. It wasn't a question. "I want the truth." The old man smiled then, just barely, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Truth's expensive, Commander. It costs what you're willing to believe." Hayes leaned forward. "Try me." Cormac nodded slowly. Then he reached for his jacket and pulled out something small, a compass, old brass, scratched to hell. He set it on the table between them. The face was normal enough, cardinal directions marked in faded paint, but around the edge, etched into the metal, were the same 7 symbols from the tattoo. "There was a unit," Cormac began, his voice dropping half a register. "Not official, not even acknowledged by the people who ran it, started in Vietnam maybe earlier. The designation changed depending on who you asked. Ghost Eye, Sentinel Line, the Forgot." He tapped the compass. "We just called ourselves observers. Our job was to go where assets couldn't, where satellites couldn't see, where even special operations couldn't risk exposure." "You're talking about deep reconnaissance," Kowalski said. "Deeper than you're thinking. We operated in denial zones, places where if you got caught, your own government would call you a rogue element. We didn't have backup, didn't have extraction plans. We went in light, stayed dark, and reported back through channels that burned after we used them." Hayes studied the compass, careful not to touch it. "Why the symbols?" "Recognition, trust. You couldn't carry ID where we went, couldn't risk written orders, so we marked ourselves. Each symbol represents a qualification. Mountain, desert, jungle, urban, maritime, Arctic, and the center," he pointed to the black sun. "That's for those who operated in all 7. How many earned that?" "In 40 years, Cormac's smile was thin. "Maybe 30, most didn't make it past 3. The weight of that number settled heavy. 30 people, across 4 decades, operating in the deepest black. Hayes had spent his entire career in special operations, thought he'd seen the darkest corners of the military's capabilities. But this was something else. This was the infrastructure beneath the infrastructure. "What happened to the unit?" Hayes asked. Cormac was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Same thing that happens to all programs that know too much. Politics, budget cuts. A few missions that went sideways in ways that made important people nervous. By the late 90s, we were being quietly shelved. They didn't deactivate us officially, couldn't, because we'd never officially existed. They just stopped calling, stopped funding, let us fade. But you stayed in the game. Some of us, the ones who couldn't walk away, we went private, sort of, took contracts through back channels, kept the network alive, helped where we could." He glanced at Hayes. "Like October 2009. Kowalski shifted forward. "You were in Afghanistan." "Pakistan, technically, about 40 miles from where you were. I'd been tracking a different situation, high-altitude supply routes, when I intercepted your distress call. You weren't broadcasting it, your radio was dead, but I caught the locator beacon signature. Faint, but there." Hayes felt something cold move through his chest. "Our beacons were offline. We checked." "They were, but every beacon has a passive emergency ping. One burst every 10 minutes. Unencrypted, low power, easy to miss unless you know what to listen for." Cormac tapped the table. "I knew what to listen for." "So you just happened to have a radio that could reach us." "I had equipment you haven't seen. Frequency hopping, burst transmission, satellite bounce. Old technology, pre-digital. Harder to intercept, harder to jam. I patched into your helmet comms through a relay I'd set up 3 months earlier for a different operation. The pieces were clicking together, but they formed a picture Hayes wasn't sure he wanted to see. You guided us through enemy territory in the dark, through a minefield, using maps we didn't have. I used maps that don't exist anymore. Topographical surveys from the Soviet occupation, overlaid with local intel from sources you couldn't access. And I'd walked that ground before. 6 years earlier, different war, same mountains. Jesus, Kowalski breathed. Cormac's expression remained neutral. Not Jesus, just an old scout with good gear and a long memory. Hayes picked up the compass, felt its weight. The metal was warm from Cormac's pocket. Why are you telling us this now? You've stayed hidden this long. You could have walked out of here, let the tattoo stay a mystery. Because you asked the right question. Cormac met his eyes. And because something's changed. Something that requires the observers to come back from the dark, not officially, not on paper, but active. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. What's changed? Cormac reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a small thumb drive. He placed it beside the compass. 2 weeks ago, 3 people with this tattoo died. Different locations, different circumstances, all within 72 hours. Hayes felt his pulse quicken. Accidents. No such thing, not with us, not like this. Cormac's voice was granite now. Someone's cleaning house. Someone knows we're still out there and wants us gone, permanently. Who? That's what I need your team to help me find out. Hayes stared at the thumb drive like it might explode. In his experience, old men with secrets and digital evidence were either brilliant assets or catastrophic liabilities. Sometimes both. He glanced at Kowalski, who gave a microscopic nod. Trust your gut. Let's see it, Hayes said. Cormac made no move toward the drive. Not here, not on your network. This goes into any system connected to DoD infrastructure. It'll trigger alarms, quiet ones, the kind that get people disappeared. You're telling me you have intelligence that's hazardous to view on secure military systems. I'm telling you the threat is inside, Commander, has been for years. We suspected it back when the observers were operational. Now I'm sure. Kowalski's jaw tightened. You're talking about a mole, high level. Higher than you're thinking, high enough to access legacy programs, high enough to know which ghosts are still breathing. Cormac pocketed the drive. The 3 who died, they weren't in the field anymore. One was teaching at a community college in Oregon. One ran a hiking supply store in Montana. One was retired Navy, living on a boat in the Keys, all far from the life, all quiet. But someone found them, Hayes said. Someone who had access to records that were supposed to be destroyed. Someone who's methodically eliminating anyone who might remember certain operations. Cormac's eyes were hard. I'm on that list. So are 4 others, and so, probably, are you. That stopped Hayes cold. What? You think that night in the Hindu Kush was random? You think I just stumbled across your beacon? Cormac leaned back. I was sent there. Not officially. But someone in the chain knew your team was compromised. Someone high enough to task an observer instead of launching a conventional rescue. Because a conventional rescue would have raised questions about what your team was really doing there. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Hayes thought back to that mission. The target hadn't been standard. Intel on a high-value individual who supposedly didn't exist. Orders that came through unusual channels. A briefing that felt more like a suggestion than a command. We were bait, Hayes said quietly. You were an asset, being used to draw out something bigger. It didn't work, you survived. But the people who set it up are still out there. And now they're cleaning up loose ends. Kowalski stood, paced to the far wall. This is conspiracy theory bullshit. You're telling us there's some shadow cabal inside DoD hunting down retired scouts. I'm telling you what I know. 3 dead in 3 days, all observers, all eliminated with precision. one staged as a car accident, one as a home invasion, one as a boating mishap. Cormac's voice never rose, but the intensity sharpened. You want to call it coincidence, that's your right, but I've been doing this too long to believe in coincidence. Hayes set the compass down carefully. What do you want from us? Protection first. I'm exposed now showing up here. If they're watching, they know. Second, I need operational support. Access to resources I don't have anymore. Transportation, communications, weapons if it comes to that. In exchange for what? In exchange for stopping whatever's coming, because the people being killed aren't the end game. They're preparation. Cormac stood, his movements still fluid despite his age. There's something happening, something big enough that someone needs witnesses eliminated before it goes live. Hayes walked to the door, locked it manually. The electronic locks were convenient, but they kept logs. He needed this conversation to stay off books for now. When he turned back, Kowalski was already pulling out his personal phone, not issued, not monitored. We're going off-grid for this, Hayes said. No official reports, no team briefs, nothing in writing. Cormac nodded approval. Smart. Don't compliment me yet. I'm not convinced you're telling the whole truth, but I'm convinced you believe it, which means there's something real here. Hayes pulled his chair closer. Start with the three who died. Names, dates, details. Cormac rattled them off from memory, no notes needed. Marcus Webb, found dead in his car at the bottom of a ravine outside Eugene, Oregon, March 11th. Brakes failed, according to the report. Webb was a vehicle specialist. He'd know if his brakes were compromised. Drove that same route twice a week for 5 years. Kowalski made notes on his phone. Next. Patricia Keegan, shot during a home invasion in Kalispell, Montana, March 13th. Nothing stolen. Single shot 9mm through the kitchen window while she was making coffee. Shooter was never found. Keegan was urban warfare certified. She cleared rooms for a living. Her house had sightlines on every approach. Someone knew exactly when and where she'd be standing. Hayes felt the cold spreading, professional hits disguised as random tragedy. And the third. David Tan drowned when his boat capsized off Key West, March 14th. Experienced sailor, perfect weather. Boat was recovered intact, no structural damage. Tan was a maritime specialist. He could navigate a typhoon in a rowboat. His death makes the least sense, which makes it the most suspicious. 3 deaths in 4 days, Hayes said. Different methods, different locations, but all people with the same training background. And all people who worked certain operations in the late 90s and early 2000s, operations that were never filed, missions that officially didn't happen. Cormac pulled out a worn notebook, flipped it open to a page covered in handwritten names. There are 7 names left who worked those missions. I'm one. You're looking at the list. Hayes scanned it. The names meant nothing to him, but the structure did. Code names, not real identities. Condor, Harrier, Falcon, Raven, Owl, Hawk, and at the bottom one more. Vale, Hayes read aloud. That you? That's me. Why Vale? For the first time, something like humor touched Cormac's face. Because I was good at staying hidden, even when you were looking right at me. Kowalski tapped the notebook. If these people are targets, we need to warn them, get them into protective custody. Already tried. 2 won't answer calls. 1 told me to go to hell, thinks I'm paranoid. 1 is ex-agency and trusts no one. The other 3, Cormac paused. The other 3 are why I'm here. They're active, still running operations, different covers. If I approach them directly, I burn them. If I do nothing, they're next. Hayes understood. You need us to make contact. Official channels, SEAL team requesting consultation, gives them cover. Exactly. And what do we tell our command? What's our justification? Cormac smiled thinly. You're running a training evolution. Close quarters battle scenarios with veteran advisors. Happens all the time. No one questions it. It was clean, simple. The kind of deception that worked because it was barely a deception at all. Hayes had run similar exercises dozens of times. "When do we start?" Kowalski asked. "Now, tonight, because the pattern says the next target gets hit within 72 hours of the last." Cormac checked his watch, "which gives us about 18 hours. They moved fast. Hayes made the calls himself, using personal contacts, keeping it casual. A training evolution, like Cormac suggested. 3 veteran consultants, all with specialized backgrounds. The kind of request that raised no flags because it was so routine it barely registered. The first was easy. A woman named Chen, former Air Force, now running a private security firm in Nevada. She agreed immediately, said she'd fly out by midnight. Her voice on the phone was clipped, professional, but Hayes heard the edge underneath. She knew something was wrong. The second took longer. A man named Reeves, no first name given, working as a wilderness guide in Colorado. He didn't want to come, said he was done with that life. Hayes pushed, mentioned the tattoo without saying it directly. "We're talking about old symbols, old friends," and Reeves went quiet. Then, "I'll be there by morning." The third never answered. Name listed as Harrier in Cormac's notebook. Phone number disconnected. Last known address in Virginia, but when Kowalski ran it through back channels, it came up as a PO box that had been closed for 6 months. "Harrier's gone dark," Kowalski reported. "Either dead or deep." Cormac stared at the notebook. "Harrier was the best of us. If they're dark, it's intentional. They're either hunting the threat themselves or hiding from it." "Can we find them?" "Maybe, but not in 18 hours. Cormac closed the notebook. "We work with who we have. Chen and Reeves will be enough to start." Hayes wasn't sure about that, but operational realities didn't wait for certainty. He authorized use of the base safe house, a nondescript building off compound used for sensitive debriefs. No surveillance, no logs, cash only. Kowalski would handle security. Hayes would run the meet. By midnight, the pieces were moving. Chen landed at North Island, took a cab to a hotel, then walked 6 blocks to shake any tail before reaching the safe house. She arrived at 0100, carrying nothing but a small backpack. She was mid-50s, compact and athletic, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes were dark and sharp. "Commander Hayes," she said, offering a hand. Her grip was firm. "I assume this isn't about training scenarios." "No, ma'am, it's not." She saw Cormac sitting in the corner, half-shadowed. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Recognition or wariness, Hayes couldn't tell. "Vale," she said quietly. "Falcon," Cormac replied. The call signs hung in the air like passwords. Hayes gestured to the table. "We've got coffee, we've got time, and we've got a problem." Chen sat, accepted the coffee, drank it black. 3 dead, she said. It wasn't a question. "You know." "I know Marcus got stupid with his car. I know Patricia forgot how to clear angles. And I know David drowned in bathtub calm water." Her eyes were hard. "I also know that's statistically impossible unless someone's making it happen." Cormac leaned forward. "When did you figure it out?" 2 days ago. I tried calling everyone on the list. Got voicemail, got disconnected numbers, got silence." She looked at Hayes. "So I started packing. And when you called with your training evolution, I knew someone else had connected the dots." "We need to find out who's doing this," Hayes said. "And why now?" Chen pulled a small drive from her pocket, different from Cormac's. "I might be able to help with that. I've been doing some digging. Old mission files, archived comms, personnel records. Most of it's been scrubbed, but I found fragments." Chen plugged her drive into an air-gapped laptop Kowalski had brought. No network connection, no wireless, completely isolated. The screen flickered to life, showing a directory of files with names that were clearly coded. "What am I looking at?" Hayes asked. "Fragments of an operation from 2003, designation Gray Dawn. It was an observer mission but not standard reconnaissance." Chen opened a file, scanned documents, heavily redacted, barely readable. We were tasked with tracking weapons shipments through Central Asia, not interdicting, just tracking. Intel gathering for someone higher up the chain. Cormac was watching her carefully. You were on Grey Dawn. Periphery, I provided aerial surveillance support off-books flights, but I saw enough to know it was bigger than weapons tracking. She pulled up another file, photos, grainy and overexposed. They showed cargo containers, unmarked trucks, faces Hayes didn't recognize. 3 months into the operation, we were pulled. No explanation. Mission terminated. Record sealed. Who gave the order? Kowalski asked. That's the problem. The order came through channels that don't exist. No signature, no authorization code, just a directive to cease all activity and destroy all evidence. Chen's voice was level, but her jaw was tight. We complied. We always complied, but some of us kept copies. Insurance. Hayes studied the photos. You think Grey Dawn is connected to the killings? I think everyone who's died was connected to Grey Dawn. Marcus was logistics. Patricia was ground surveillance. David was maritime tracking. All of us touched that operation in some way. Cormac nodded slowly. And now, 22 years later, someone wants to erase every person who remembers it. Which means whatever we were tracking is still active, still sensitive, still worth killing for. Chen closed the laptop. The question is what? What could be valuable enough to justify a purge 2 decades later? The room fell silent. Hayes ran through possibilities, weapons, money, intelligence, assets, but none of it fit. Those things had shelf lives, secrets decayed, people retired, the urgency faded. Unless, it's not about what you found, Hayes said slowly. It's about who gave the order to stop looking. Cormac's eyes sharpened. Go on. Grey Dawn was terminated abruptly, record sealed. That level of shutdown doesn't happen unless someone high up got nervous. Not about the target, about the investigation. Hayes stood, paced. You weren't tracking weapons. You were getting too close to something else. Something the person running the operation didn't want found. Chen inhaled sharply. A parallel operation. Someone was using Grey Dawn as cover for something else. And whoever ran that parallel operation is now in a position to clean up witnesses, Kowalski finished. Cormac pulled out his own drive. Which brings us to this. I've been tracking financial patterns. Money moving through shell companies, defense contractors, offshore accounts. Small amounts, hard to trace but persistent. It's been going on for 20 years. He plugged in his drive. The screen filled with spreadsheets, transaction logs, names, and dates. It looked like chaos, but Hayes could see the pattern. Money flowing from DoD budgets through intermediaries, disappearing into accounts that led nowhere. How much? Hayes asked. Conservatively, $2 billion over 20 years, maybe more. It's being siphoned in amounts small enough to avoid audits but large enough to fund serious operations. Black budget, Kowalski said. Blacker than black. This isn't official SAP funding. This is theft. Systematic, organized, and whoever's running it has access to the highest levels of defense spending. The implications were staggering. Hayes had spent his career following orders, trusting the chain of command, believing the system worked. But this was evidence of something else, a parasitic operation living inside the military's infrastructure, feeding off resources meant for legitimate defense. We need names, Hayes said. Who has access to this level of funding? Cormac pulled up another file. That's where it gets complicated. The accounts are routed through contractors, but the authorization signatures are digitally masked. However, I did find one pattern. Every transaction requires a dual signature, one operational, one administrative. The operational signatures rotate different every time, but the administrative signature, he highlighted a string of code, is always the same. Can you trace it? I traced it to a clearance level, not a person but a tier of access, someone with TS, SCI, and SAP authorization. That narrows it to maybe 200 people wide. 200 was still impossible to investigate, but it was a start. Chen leaned back. If we assume the person behind this was also involved in Grey Dawn, we can narrow further. Who had oversight of observer operations in 2003? Cormac pulled up a personnel chart, faded and pixelated. Observer operations were compartmentalized. Each team reported through different channels, but there was one central coordination node, a position designated Sentinel Prime. It was a rotating assignment, usually held by an O6 or higher with Joint Task Force experience. Who held it in 2003? Cormac's finger traced the chart. That's redacted, but I remember meeting him once. Tall, thin, always wore aviator sunglasses even indoors, called himself Shepard. We all thought it was pretentious. Shepard, Chen repeated. I remember that name. He came to one of our briefings, asked a lot of questions about what we'd seen, who we'd talked to. He seemed less interested in the mission and more interested in us. Hayes felt pieces clicking. He was vetting you, making sure you didn't know too much. And when Grey Dawn got shut down, he knew exactly who had been involved, which means he's known for 22 years who might be a liability. So why wait until now to eliminate them? Kowalski asked. Cormac closed the laptop. Because something's changed. Something's about to happen that requires complete security. An operation, a revelation, something big enough that even the possibility of witnesses is unacceptable. Then we find Shepard, Hayes said. Real name, current position, everything. Easier said than done. If he's still active, he's buried deep. And if he knows we're looking, we become targets too. Chen stood stretched. Then we don't look directly, we look at what he's building, follow the money, find out what $2 billion over 20 years buys. It was solid logic. Money left trails, even black money. Hayes turned to Kowalski. Get me a financial analyst, someone with forensic accounting experience, and someone we can trust. I know a guy, ex-FBI, works private now, he owes me. Get him here, tonight if possible. Kowalski nodded and stepped out to make calls. Hayes turned back to Cormac and Chen. What else do we know about Shepard? Not much, Cormac admitted. He kept himself isolated. Most of us never saw him face to face. Communications were always through intermediaries. But he had to file reports, Chen said. Even black operations require documentation. It's just a question of where. They spent the next 2 hours digging through Chen's and Cormac's archives, looking for any mention of Shepard, any clue to his real identity. The work was tedious, cross-referencing dates, locations, authorization codes. Hayes's eyes burned from staring at the screen, but he didn't stop. At 0300, Kowalski returned with a thin man in his 40s, balding, wearing rumpled khakis and a polo shirt. He carried a laptop bag and looked annoyed at being woken up. This is Ray Delgado, Kowalski said. Best financial forensics investigator I know. Delgado set his bag down, surveyed the room with the wariness of someone who'd spent too much time around secrets. You said this was urgent. You didn't say it was off books. It's both, Hayes said. We need you to trace financial transactions connected to defense spending. Large sums moved through shell companies over a 20-year period. Delgado whistled low. That's not an investigation, that's a career. You're talking thousands of data points, multiple jurisdictions, offshore accounts. We have a starting point. Cormac handed over his drive. These are the transactions we've identified. We need you to find the pattern, find the source. Delgado plugged in the drive, opened the files, and his expression changed from annoyed to interested. Holy shit, this is systematic fraud, military budget fraud. Can you trace it? Maybe, probably, it'll take time. He looked up. And it'll take access to databases I'm not supposed to touch anymore. Hayes crossed his arms. How much access? Treasury, DoD financial systems, contractor billing records, basically everything the federal government uses to track money. Delgado smiled thinly. I can get in. I still have credentials from my bureau days, but if I get caught, I'm looking at federal prison time. If we don't stop this, people die, Chen said quietly. More people, and whatever's being built with that money goes operational. Delgado stared at her, then at the screen, then back at Hayes. You're serious. This isn't just accounting fraud, this is, what, a conspiracy? We don't know yet. That's what we need you to find out. Delgado was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop. I'll need 12 hours, maybe less if I get lucky, but I'll need absolute silence. No interruptions. Hayes nodded. You'll have it. They cleared the room, left Delgado alone with his screens and his coffee. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. False dawn, that gray pre-sunrise glow that made everything look unreal. Chen lit a cigarette, offered one to Cormac. He declined. They stood in silence, three people bound by secrets and survival. How long do you think we have? Chen asked. Before Shepard figures out we're investigating, Cormac considered. Hours, maybe less. I showed up at a SEAL compound. That's not invisible. So we're on the clock. We've been on the clock since Marcus died. Hayes watched the horizon. Then we move fast. Delgado traces the money. We identify Shepard, and we figure out what he's building before anyone else dies. Chen exhaled smoke, and if we're too late? Hayes didn't answer, because the truth was they might already be too late, and if Shepard was as connected as they suspected, there might not be a way to stop him at all. But that wasn't a truth any of them could afford to accept, not yet. Reeves arrived just before dawn. He came in on a red-eye from Denver, took a bus from the airport, walked the last 3 miles. Operational security habits died hard. He was tall, rangy, with sun-darkened skin and the kind of lean muscle that came from years in the mountains. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they swept the safe house perimeter twice before he knocked. Hayes let him in. Reeves. Commander. No rank, no salute, just acknowledgement. Reeves saw Cormac and nodded once. Vale. Harrier still MIA? Cormac asked. Haven't heard from Harrier in 6 months. Not unusual, Harrier goes dark sometimes, but given the circumstances. Reeves shrugged. Chen emerged from the kitchen with fresh coffee. Raven. Falcon. Reeves accepted the coffee, drank deep. So we're calling this a reunion or a war council? Both, Hayes said. He briefed Reeves on everything, the deaths, Grey Dawn, Shepard, the financial investigation. Reeves listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Hayes finished, Reeves was quiet for a moment. Then, I was on Grey Dawn, ground surveillance, northern routes. I spent 4 months in the mountains watching convoys. Never understood why we pulled out. Because Shepard didn't want us finding what was really moving through those routes, Chen said. Which was? That's what we're trying to figure out. Reeves set down his coffee. I kept logs against protocol, but I'm paranoid. Dates, times, convoy compositions. Most of it's in my head, but I wrote some down. He tapped his temple. You want details, I can give you details. Hayes felt a spark of hope. Everything we